The palace gates creaked open, their iron hinges groaning like an omen. From the outside, the forbidden city shimmered with gold, jeweled walls, endless silk, and the promise of luxury. But step inside, and the fragrance of incense failed to hide something else, the suffocating stench of fear. Here lived the emperor's concubines. To the world, they appeared like queens, wrapped in jade bracelets and velvet robes, their smiles painted as delicately as porcelain. But behind that glittering veil lay a truth far darker. These women were not free. They were trapped, prisoners in a cage so beautiful it disguised its own cruelty. Imagine a girl only 13 torn from her family and renamed as if her past never existed. From that moment on, she belonged to the emperor. Her beauty was her only weapon, and her greatest curse. Within these walls, every glance was dangerous, every whispered word a potential death sentence. A sip of poisoned tea, a silk scarf tightened around the throat, a rival's dagger hidden in the night. This was daily life. History glorifies emperors, their conquests and palaces, but rarely tells us what became of the women locked inside. Those who obeyed were forgotten, those who defied were erased. And yet in the shadows of forgotten scrolls their suffering whispers to us still. Tales of endless rivalries, secret tortures, and bodies left to rot in hidden chambers. The most chilling part, what we consider horrific, was their normal. This is not the romance of royal dramas. This is the unflinching truth of China's imperial harems. A realm of silk and blood, where beauty was both crown and curse, and survival was a game only a few could win. And tonight, we dare to uncover it. Long before a young girl ever stepped inside the forbidden city, her fate was often sealed. In villages across China, families whispered of the emperor's court as if it were heaven itself, the highest honor a daughter could achieve. But the truth was far from heaven. It was a carefully polished illusion, designed to hide the machinery of control. From childhood, beauty became a weaponized curse. Daughters were fed special diets, their movements taught to flow like water, their speech softened into obedience. A simple smile, a lowered gaze, even the tilt of the head was rehearsed endlessly, because one day government officials would arrive in distant provinces, scouring the land for the most perfect girls, candidates for the imperial harem. Once chosen, there was no refusal. A daughter was taken from her family, sometimes as young as 10 or 12. Her name, her past, even her language could be stripped away. She was given a new title, a rank, and placed into a hierarchy where even the smallest misstep meant humiliation, or worse. Inside the palace, the world was divided by walls of gold. At the very center stood the emperor, a man seen as the son of heaven. Around him swirled hundreds of concubines, each desperate to secure his fleeting glance. Some sought survival through silence, others through ruthless schemes. Alliances were forged, betrayed, and broken again, all in the shadows of corridors lit by candlelight. But luxury was never freedom. The women were guarded day and night by eunuchs, their lives monitored like prisoners. Letters to families were censored, movements were restricted, and the rules were endless: how to walk, how to kneel, how to serve wine, how to breathe in the emperor's presence. Every detail of existence was controlled. The palace itself seemed alive, whispering its own warnings. Its courtyards bloomed with peonies, symbols of fragile beauty destined to wither. Its towering walls promised protection but felt like tombstones. Even the silence of night carried secrets. Muffled cries, hurried footsteps, the faint scraping of locked doors. And then there was the constant shadow of competition. For every concubine who rose in favor, dozens were cast into despair. The promise of bearing the emperor's child was the ultimate prize, a golden ticket to survival. But it was also the most dangerous path. Rival concubines might poison food, arrange accidents, or bribe servants to sabotage one another. A single mistake, a single slip could mean being sent to the cold palace, a dark, abandoned wing of the palace where forgotten women wasted away, nameless and broken. The imperial court projected order, but beneath it was chaos, a silent battlefield where weapons were painted smiles and whispered secrets. And this is where their descent into horror truly began. Once inside the glittering walls of the Forbidden City, the mask of beauty began to peel away. What had seemed like an honor quickly revealed itself as a slow and methodical descent into suffering. At first it came as whispers. A concubine who had once laughed too loudly vanished overnight. Another, who dared show sadness in the emperor's presence, was suddenly sent away, her chambers sealed, her name erased from the records. For the women who remained, the message was clear. Survival required silence, obedience, and an iron mask of perfection. But silence had its cost. The body began to suffer first. Concubines were forced to maintain flawless appearances. Elaborate hairpins weighed down their skulls until their scalps bled. Layers of silken robes suffocated them in summer heat, and their diets were tightly controlled to maintain ideal beauty. Some were fed rare tonics laced with dangerous herbs meant to enhance fertility, but instead they brought fevers, tremors, and miscarriages. Every sip of tea, every bite of fruit carried suspicion, for poisoning was a weapon as common as jewelry. Night after night, paranoia took root. Imagine lying in a gilded bed, staring into the shadows, listening for the faintest sound of silk slippers creeping closer. Some women woke screaming, convinced they saw pale faces at their bedside. Others reported the phantom cries of infants, babies who had died mysteriously after birth, their deaths never spoken of again. The palace air itself was heavy with dread. Perfumed corridors masked the stench of sickness. Lantern light flickered against painted screens. But the silence behind those screens carried another story. Muffled coughs, the shuffle of eunuchs dragging away those who had fallen from grace. Psychological torment was a daily poison. Concubines were forced to smile at the very women who plotted against them, to compliment the rival who might tomorrow bribe a servant to slip ground glass into their rice. Friendships were shallow masks, every gesture calculated, every word a potential trap. A single rumor whispered into the emperor's ear could destroy a life within hours. Then came the cold palace, a punishment so feared it haunted dreams. This crumbling, isolated wing of the palace was where disfavored concubines were cast aside. No attendants, no comfort, no visitors, only stone walls, dust, and silence. Women left there often starved. Some clawed at the doors until their nails bled, and others simply lost their minds, speaking to shadows until their voices cracked. The living became ghosts before death ever claimed them. For those who remained in favor, the suffering was different but no less cruel. Bearing the emperor's child promised power, yet it was a path paved with blood. Pregnancies were fragile in such a poisoned world. Many women miscarried, their grief swallowed by court. Officials who wrote the deaths off as ill fortune. Sometimes newborns vanished without explanation, rivals ensuring no child but their own would live to claim favor. And through it all, the emperor remained distant, godlike, untouchable. To him, the concubines were ornaments, replaceable, countless. Their pain was irrelevant, their deaths unworthy of record. The deeper one stayed in the palace, the clearer the truth became. This was not a home, nor a place of honor. It was a living tomb where youth, beauty, and hope were stripped away layer by layer, leaving only shadows of women who once dreamed of freedom. And at the heart of this descent was a chilling realization. The suffering of these women was not accidental. It was engineered, controlled, and meticulously hidden, so the outside world would continue to believe in the myth of imperial paradise. But the nightmare was far from over. Behind sealed doors and burned records, even darker revelations awaited. For centuries, the truth about the concubines was wrapped in silk and gold, disguised as tales of luxury. But buried beneath the official histories lies another record, fragments of documents, whispers passed through generations, and forbidden scrolls that dared to tell what really happened. It began with the disappearance of records. In imperial archives, entire pages dedicated to certain women were deliberately torn away. Names once etched with honor were blackened with ink, their fates erased as if they had never existed. Yet in private letters of eunuchs and hidden diaries of palace servants, shadows of truth emerged, tales of starvation, madness, and deliberate elimination. One such account describes an autopsy performed in secret on a concubine who had died of fever. The physician's report, hastily hidden, revealed fragments of ground jade embedded in her stomach, a known poison that tore the body apart from within. Another hidden record speaks of newborns smothered under silken cloths, their cries silenced before they could ever threaten the line of succession. These truths were never meant to reach the light of day. But the most chilling revelations were not about death. They were about survival. Some women, desperate to cling to the emperor's favor, submitted to experimental tonics crafted by court alchemists. These mixtures, laced with mercury, cinnabar, and toxic herbs, promised eternal youth and fertility. Instead, they rotted the body from within. Teeth blackened, hair fell out, and bones became brittle as glass. Yet their suffering was concealed, masked behind powder and rouge until the women wasted away entirely, their bodies quietly removed under cover of night. There were darker secrets still. The cold palace was not merely a prison, but a graveyard of the living. Unearthed records tell of eunuchs ordered to wall up certain chambers after the women inside had died, sealing them forever as if they had never breathed. Even centuries later, during restorations of palace ruins, skeletal remains were discovered in forgotten rooms, bones still adorned with jade bracelets and fragments of silken robes. The empire had not simply punished its concubines, it had entombed them in silence. And yet the cruelty was not random. It was calculated, institutional, and political. By ensuring concubines remained in constant fear, the emperor and his court maintained absolute control. Love was forbidden, loyalty was manufactured, and even motherhood became a weapon. Every child born was a pawn in the empire's game of survival, and every woman, no matter how favored, was expendable the moment she ceased to be useful. The most disturbing revelation came from the testimony of a single eunuch. Preserved in a banned text centuries later, he described how during one particularly tense year of succession struggles, more than 30 concubines were quietly executed in a single night. Their bodies were not buried with honor, but burned in secret, their ashes scattered in palace gardens to erase all trace of their existence. Official records marked the event as a plague. It was here in these forbidden truths that the myth of paradise collapsed entirely. The glittering palaces were not homes of beauty, but theaters of torment. The concubines were not privileged companions of emperors. They were prisoners, pawns, and victims of an empire's hunger for control. And as these revelations came to light, one truth grew impossible to deny. The greatest empire of the East had been built not only on war and conquest, but on the unseen suffering of countless women whose voices were deliberately silenced. The suffering of the concubines was not isolated within palace walls. It rippled outward, shaping the very course of Chinese history. What happened behind those golden gates determined wars, alliances, and even the fate of dynasties. Emperors who lived surrounded by fear and paranoia often projected that same instability onto their rule. Court officials who manipulated concubines for political gain learned how to manipulate emperors themselves. And succession, the lifeblood of an empire, was turned into a battlefield of hidden daggers. Entire dynasties rose and fell because of these women's silent struggles. A single favored concubine could elevate her clan to wealth and power, while her downfall could drag entire families into disgrace and execution. Jealousy between factions of concubines created invisible wars inside the palace, wars that spilled into the empire's politics like poison leaking from a sealed jar. Ministers, generals, and noble houses all found their fortunes tied to the emperor's bedchamber. The psychological toll on the emperors themselves was equally profound. Surrounded by suspicion and betrayal, many rulers trusted no one, not their court, not their generals, and often not even their own children. Some emperors became reclusive, withdrawing into a haze of concubines, alchemists, and false promises of immortality. Others lashed out in paranoia, executing advisors, relatives, and wives alike. The throne was never stable when the emperor himself was trapped in a web of fear woven by his own household. The cultural legacy was equally haunting. Official records painted concubines as ornaments of beauty, but folk tales whispered of women who cursed dynasties from the grave, of restless spirits who wandered palace ruins crying for justice. To the common people, concubines symbolized both forbidden desire and tragic warning, a reminder that even in the most glorious court, human life could be crushed without a second thought, and this cruelty did not vanish with time. The system of concubinage persisted for over 1,000 years, repeating its cycle of suffering across dynasty after dynasty. Every palace that glittered with wealth and power was built atop the same silent sacrifices. When historians look back today, they see more than personal tragedies. They see a pattern. A political machine that consumed women, distorted emperors, and shaped the destiny of China itself. The empire's grandeur cannot be separated from its shadows, and those shadows were filled with the forgotten cries of concubines. The echoes of the concubines did not vanish with the fall of dynasties. Their suffering seeped into culture, superstition, and memory, shaping how generations viewed power, beauty, and control. Yet their stories remained shrouded in silence, a silence carefully designed to protect emperors and glorify empires. Even today, fragments of their lives survive not in official records, but in whispers. Folk legends speak of pale women wandering palace ruins, their cries carried on the wind. Ghost tales became the only way common people could speak of injustice without punishment. In this way, memory transformed into myth, and truth was buried beneath fear. But their legacy also shaped how societies viewed women. For centuries, beauty was praised but also feared, seen as both a gift and a curse. To be admired was to be vulnerable. To be chosen was to risk ruin. The concubines became symbols of fragility, reminders of how power could consume innocence until nothing remained but shadows. The greatest tragedy is that most of their names are gone. These women laughed, cried, dreamed, and feared, yet history reduced them to numbers, ranks, and faceless ornaments. Their humanity was stolen twice, first by the palace that imprisoned them and then by the records that erased them. And so, the concubines' true legacy is not only their suffering, but the silence that followed. A silence that warns us how easily pain can be hidden, how quickly voices can be erased when power controls the pen of history. The Forbidden City may now stand as a museum, but behind its golden walls lies a truth that still whispers. The cost of unchecked power is always paid in human lives. And so the story of the concubines does not end with peace, and it ends with silence. Behind golden walls and silken curtains, they lived lives filled with fear, isolation, and cruelty, until even their names were erased from history. Their voices may be lost, but their shadows still linger, warning us of how far power can twist the human soul. But what do you think? Were these women merely victims of a brutal system? Or were some of them complicit, using the same cruelty to survive and climb higher? Do you believe the truth of their suffering was deliberately erased to protect the image of emperors? Or do you think we will never know the full darkness that hid behind the palace gates? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you wish to uncover more hidden truths, more stories of empires, cruelty, and forgotten lives, then make sure you subscribe to Torture Relics, because this is only the beginning. History still holds countless dark secrets waiting to be revealed.